Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today I'm proud to bring you retro sci-fi horror cinema with the one, the only Brian Walker of Brian's Drive-In Theater. Greetings, Brian. How are you, sir?
I am well tonight, Hercules. How are you doing?
I'm doing phenomenally well. It's been a very interesting few weeks, but very busy and very productive. So nothing to complain about.
Same here. Very busy in the middle of the spring semester. Golly, I think midterm is something like next week, or it's coming right up. I've got some serious grading to do.
I remember those days of sitting doing grading and
Oh, I'd sooner take a beating. It's the only thing I don't like about teaching. It's like all this evaluation and splitting hairs sometimes, and it's but it's why we're here. So good. Back in the old days when I was a kid, it sounded more fun to pass judgment on other people, but it's not really. It's really no fun at all.
no, I used to have a problem in grading because I treasured unique perspectives.
Mhm.
So learning the grading curve looked awry. So I always had to talk to some administrator about the fact that I don't have like a curve with some people not doing well and other people doing well and a bunch of people doing exceptionally well. It was everybody did okay, in my grading.
Yeah, I kind of like that. It was just everybody's just anyway. I got inspired by the topic that we're going to talk about tonight just a little while back. What I want to talk about tonight is an actor named, or not an actor, I'm sorry, a director named Bill Rebane, who has kind of a cult following in a way when it comes to horror and sci-fi movies. He's made several films that people have maybe heard of because of the titles, but I bet they haven't sat all the way through them because that can be kind of painful. But um, one of them was Monster A Go-Go. It's a film that he shot.
Go.
See, now I bet a lot of people have heard the title, but I bet they haven't seen the film. And because seeing the film is actually kind of painful. A little backstory about Bill Rebane. He was born in Eastern Europe, I think Latvia, and came to the United States when he was a kid. He immigrated and settled in the Chicago area, and quickly became interested in all things media. He liked television production, radio, and he worked on both sides when it came to radio. He worked at radio. He worked at a couple of radio stations, but he also sold German-made Grundig radios. I mean, well, he didn't personally sell them, but he worked for the company that did distribute them, and it was based in Chicago. And one of the things that he did on the side too was we tried to do film production. He tried to get horror films produced, and the first one was kind of a misfire for him, which was Monster A Go-Go. It was shot in and around Chicago. He first had the idea for it in 1961, and I think they did most of the filming with Bill Rebane in 1963. After a while, he needed to move on because he had a lot of projects up in the air, and he needed some money because he wanted to buy a large parcel of land. So he sold off what he had of a movie called Terror at Half Day. That was his working title, and sold it off to another exploitation director named Herschel Gordon Lewis, who had done nudies in the early 60s, and then they switched over to horror films when nudies became really passe. And then Herschel Gordon Lewis retitled the film, shot a few new scenes, but he couldn't get most of the cast back. So and Herschel Gordon Lewis was also from the Chicago area, or lived there, I should say, at the same time that Bill Rebane was living there. So they were sort of, competing cult film directors, I guess, in the nation's third largest metro area, which is kind of interesting. But after a while, Bill Rebane decided that he didn't want to live in the city anymore and cashed out. He worked hard. even for a young guy, he had, amassed, a little bit of money. So he bought a large parcel of land in northern Wisconsin, not too far from the Michigan UP. So that tells you how far up that is. And he kept adding to, his parcels of land until he, had, I think, a couple hundred acres, and he built his own film studio on it. And he would shoot short films, commercials in it, and eventually he shot, some features in it. But it must be kind of hard to get your cast to northern Wisconsin. Now he was able to do it later on in the 70s. By the way, Bill Rebane is still with us.
Oh, that's
He was a really young guy when he got when he was doing Terror at Half Day, which is his first film. He would have only been probably 25 years old. And it was already very successful, at several different endeavors, not necessarily feature film direction, but he had done a lot of short film direction, some of which got purchased by some of the bigger independent studios like Crown International and American International. And they were all shot in and around the Chicago area and tried to exploit whatever fad was going on at the time. I think the first one he did was called Twist Craze, which you can find on YouTube, as a matter of fact. And if I recall directly, there used to be on American Movie Classics, otherwise now known as AMC, not American Movie Classics. They used to have a Saturday night TV show called American Pop, where AMC would show a collection of really kitschy mid-century films and shorts, newsreels and things from the late 50s and early 60s. And if I'm not mistaken, at least one of Bill Rebane's shorts from the early 60s exploiting some dance crazes was shown during American Pop. They were lots of fun to watch, very colorful, vibrant, frenetic, kind of interesting, and interesting that they got picked up by, he got picked up by a decent studio. American International in the early 60s was doing really well, especially for an independent, making lots of money. And Bill Rebane was able to make quite a bit of money on some of his features as well. Unfortunately, not Terror at Half Day, though. I think he just sort of had to recoup some of his losses when he sold that to Herschel Gordon Lewis. And I've seen Monster a Go-Go probably, this is going to sound sad, I bet 10 times over the course of my life. And like I said, I ran it as a movie of the day when it was Bill Rebane's birthday about a week and a half ago. It's public domain. And just incomprehensible, terrible, and so much fun to watch at the same time. It's a classic of its own kind.
I remember I saw it. I don't remember much of it, but I remember I saw it during the mom and pop video store days when you can go into
Yes.
a mom and pop video store and find the weirdest stuff in the world. And I used to be attracted to those like Gonzo type movies that I hadn't heard of, and that looked, the box was interesting, so I remember taking it out and watching it.
Well, and I think your experience was very similar to mine. When I started renting movies, they were VHS, because my first VCR was a VHS. Some people had Betamax, but VHS was cheaper. The tapes were cheaper, the machines were cheaper. The quality wasn't as good, but that's the way I went. Anyway, and that's by the time I bought a VCR when I was in high school. That's when the video rentals really took off, and most of the store by then was VHS. So it's probably another reason why I went with that format. But a lot of those, when you went to the horror section, a lot of it was this old grindhouse stuff, like
Yes.
Herschel Gordon Lewis, like 2000 Maniacs, Color Me Blood Red, Blood Feast. Those were among some of the first videotapes that I rented.
Me too.
And was just thrilled. The cover art used everything, especially with a low budget movie, and I'd look at the cover art. I was like, yeah, I'm spending $1 to rent this, and would take it home, and just loved them. Probably rented them way too often. And but that's what you saw. You didn't, a lot of, if you were back at that time, a lot of you producers didn't want their stuff ending up on your video cassette because they were afraid people would pirate them, which they did.
Yeah.
People, you would get, oh gosh, I'm not going to cop to anything illegal, but in some places you could rent a VCR for a weekend or something like that for, I don't know, like $10 with a deposit, and people would connect their a rental to the one that they
Yeah,
owned.
yeah, with the cables, and yeah, I remember
Mhm.
those days. And in the streets too, in New York, they had people with blankets, and you could get VHS tapes that were obviously, dubs. Although some of them, they did really good job with duplicating the covers, so you really didn't know if they were dubs or not. And
Hmm.
movies that had just come out sometimes would be on those blankets as well. So as soon as the police would come around, these guys would pick up their blankets and scoot out.
Well, I never did anything like that. I think everything that I ever bought, the very first horror film I ever bought on VHS was Night of the Living Dead, because it was public domain.
Mine was
And
Conan the Barbarian. I bought
that
a
was, I bet that you spent some money on that. But
box
those
of
were,
Conan alone. It was a pristine copy, and also the VCR cost like almost $500. It was $490 something dollars. So saved
mhm.
a long time to get that, and Conan, and that was the only movie I had for a while, and I watched it over and over and over and over again.
Well, the one I watched over and over again was Night of the Living Dead, the original, because I think that I bought the tape in a department store, and I think it was like 10, $15, and that was cheap back then. And it was public domain, so it wasn't going to cost very much. They didn't have to pay any rights. But like I said, initially, if you wanted to buy a copy of, let's say, an MGM movie or something, it was probably like $90.
Yeah.
Which was a ton of money back then.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that. And then I discovered the mom and pop stores, and the mom and pop stores, that was a delight in and of itself. And then there were places in the village that had even more obscure films that, you couldn't even conceive these films being made. And you're watching someone saying, I can't believe I'm watching this. That's when I discovered that like Rhino and Alpha
Mhm.
Video and Something Weird Video had all the old Peplum films. So I
Yeah.
started buying Peplum films for my sword and sandal collection. Because before then, unless you caught them on TV, it's some weird time, like on Channel 11 or Channel 9 in our area. That's it. You saw them, and then, you had collectibles you can collect, but now you can actually watch the films whenever you wanted to. And that was like mind-boggling.
Well, pretty early on in my VHS days, I started recording stuff over the air. And depending on your reception, it wasn't necessarily the best of things, but if you wanted to see something different, or a film that you'd read about but was not going to be released on VHS anytime soon, you record it from over the air. And
Right.
oftentimes the movies that I like were on at 2 o'clock in the morning,
Mine too.
or I would see them on Commander USA, in the mid '80s, which is a show I loved. Sadly, the actor who portrayed Captain or Commander USA passed away several years ago. But if you look on YouTube, you can find the old shows, and they were shot in and around New Jersey. So might be something for you to look up. If Do you remember Commander USA at all?
I remember, but I don't remember very much. Like I remember Diver Dan, but I don't remember very much about what that was about. I just remember that I used to watch it, and I remember
Mm.
like several other shows that were unusual, or that had movies or cartoons that they used to,
Hmm.
focus on. Uh,
Oops.
I remember Zachary.
Oh, I loved Zachary the Cool Ghoul. Yeah, he was awesome.
later on
Huge.
in Pyro.
I'm a huge Zachary fan. I've got I've actually got a poster that he autographed.
Oh, cool.
Sadly, he did not autograph it for me. I actually bought it pre-autographed, but it was after he passed away. And he lived to be close to 100, so he had a pretty amazing constitution until right there at the end. Um, and I actually have that poster framed, and it's displayed in my home.
Very cool.
It is. When I first bought it, well, when I first saw it, I found it at Ides Entertainment in Pittsburgh, which is just a fantastic store all the way around. If you're, I don't know that we would ever get you out of there because one floor is just all collectibles.
Oh, wow.
Just anything and everything you can think of, from action figures on, and a lot of it's vintage. They have some new stuff too, but a lot of it is vintage. If you go up to the third floor, that's the floor that I like the best. That's where you find all the movie memorabilia. And you also find a pretty nice collection of interesting albums from largely the 50s and 60s, stuff that's kind of off the beaten path. It's kind of an unusual assortment. I like how it's curated because for some bizarre reason, it goes with all the movie memorabilia that they sell. And then they've also got a DVD concession where they sell a lot of cult stuff. They do carry some mainstream, but most of their collection's cult. And I always drop lots of money anytime I go in there. And a lot of my movie memorabilia is actually from that store. It's in downtown Pittsburgh, very close to the convention center, really convenient and easy to get to.
I don't go much to New York City anymore, but I used to live there. I lived there for much of my life, and I visited many times since. My son lives in New York City now, and I miss, though, going down to the Village and finding just about every type of store you could possibly imagine. And when I lived in New York or nearer to New York, and had things I was doing in New York, like my show or working in the human services, I used to go look around like these small blocks, to see what stores they had, and I find like the best collectibles stores, and they didn't have them all together like you're describing, but they had like old records. Another store would have old action figures and collectibles. Somebody else would have photographs. And Jerry Olinsky's was there. I don't know if you know about them, but they were really big with memorabilia photos from movies. So yeah, I used to go there, and Jerry was there. So, you could ask for anything and you probably have it somewhere, even if it wasn't out for display, it'd be somewhere in the back.
Yeah, I've lived in college towns for most of my life, and you used to find cool places like that in college towns. Unfortunately, I have to say that the one that I live in doesn't offer much of that anymore. Like a lot of places, our downtown area is sort of decaying. Like a lot of the storefronts are closed now.
Yeah.
And the farther you get away from campus, the worse it gets. It's a shame. It's one of the things that I like about college towns is that you do find really cool record stores and memorabilia and collectibles and things like that. And I'm afraid that part of the market may be driven online.
Yes.
And which is all right if you know exactly what you want. If you want the press book for, let's say, a James Bond movie or something like that, yeah, getting that on the internet's going to be a lot faster than trying to find it.
And sometimes
But,
cheaper.
oh yeah, well, and sometimes not. My luck when I've been buying memorabilia lately, I've had more luck in stores than I have online. In terms of price. And I browse too. It's I don't necessarily know what I want. Sometimes you find something and it's your favorite item, but you didn't know you wanted it until you saw
Yes.
it. So
In some cases, you didn't know it existed. It's like, oh, wow.
that's oftentimes the truth. You are right about that. That is often the truth. You're just like, whoa, I've never heard of this before, and it's so cool.
Now it's mine.
And you'd be, wherever we've gone, I have dragged movie memorabilia back on planes, and which is not always easy to do. I've had to get really creative over the years, because you'll see a piece and you'll think, well, it's not that big, and then you try to stuff it in your suitcase, and you're like, oh God. Once, Greg and I, we had to go to a conference. It was in Savannah, Georgia, and he was delivering a paper, and the university paid for him, that is, to rent a car and to drive it to Savannah. And I was just kidding him. I was telling them they were going to give him, the bottom of the barrel micro car. So when he pulled up to the house in it, it was like, oh my God, it was, I wouldn't call it bottom of the barrel, but it was this tiny little car. I mean, and I mean, really tiny. From the outside anyway. Once you got in it, it actually was pretty spacious. And I thought we were going to hate it. We loved it. We got all of our stuff in it. On the way, we stopped at a huge antique mall, and I bought one sheet posters that were shrink wrapped onto a piece of cardboard. And you know how big one sheets are.
Yes.
They're 27 by 41. And I bought like 2 or 3, and I thought, oh God, I'm in dinky car. How am I, how am I going to do this? And I got everything in there. You just had to be kind of creative about it. So Hateful Micro Car actually turned out to be just fine.
Wow.
So where there's a will, there's a way. You can always cram a little bit more. And that's kind of, it's one of the things I like to do whenever we do travel, is you just want to get out. You don't want to go to the same Target or wherever that you go ordinarily at home. You want to see something different, and that's kind of what I seek out whenever we travel. And speaking of travel, one of the things that inspired tonight's topic, which is Bill Rebane, is that I'm going to do something in July that I've never done before.
What will you do, pray tell?
We're going to the Wisconsin Dells.
Oh, cool.
I've never been, and I've always wanted to go. Every photograph I've ever seen, and tonight when I was walking on the treadmill, I usually watch YouTube when I'm on the treadmill, and I watched a few. I've watched a few homemade travel logs that people that are ubiquitous on YouTube, by the way. People who think that they're television hosts. They're kind of fun to watch. It does give you a really good sense if you're going to be traveling somewhere that you've not been before. It gives you a good sense of what features there are and what things that there are to see. And the Dells looks gorgeous. I mean, it really does. I'm really eager to see the river and everything. Pumped up about it. But from there, we are going to drive into the Michigan Upper Peninsula, and we will be very close to where Bill Rebane's northern Wisconsin studio was.
Would you be visiting?
No, probably not, because he sold that off probably 30 years ago or more. The last I heard, he was back in Wisconsin. So.
And he's with us, as you said before. So is he a celebrated person in his community?
That's a good question. I really don't know. You and me, I kind of like off the beaten path.
Yes.
Things. Maybe it's just me. But
no, it's me, my wife. It's most of the people I know.
Well, that's true. That's true. There is a shocking number of people like us out there. There really are. And it's everything now is so homogenized. Entertainment, at least mass entertainment, new stuff, and it's so wonderful to be able to find your own communities, and to find your own niche, stuff that you enjoy that you thought that nobody else would ever like, and you find out that, oh God, there's a lot of me.
Yeah, I started a few Facebook groups, as you know, and like the Arnold alone has like 21,000 people in it. It surprised the hell out of me. To see so many people into Arnold's Conan and Hercules movies, and his recently being Zeus in that Super Bowl commercial a few years ago. There
Yes,
are people all over the planet who are focused on that.
that's true. But you know, he has name recognition.
Yes,
Uh, but as we found out about 15 minutes ago with you, Monster A Go-Go also has name recognition.
there
So,
you go. How can you forget that name? Having heard it once, it
well,
won't
that's it. And it
get
sounds
itself on your neurons. It's there forever.
so ludicrous that you think, oh, yeah, I think I have to see this. And that's something that Herschel Gordon Lewis was really good at. He was up there with the best when it came to hoopla, when it came to hyping, marketing his products. His products usually, production wise, left something to be desired, but the marketing was just first rate. The posters are gruesome and bloody and gory. I mean, great artwork. And that he probably spent more on the artwork than he did the movie. But you know, that's how you get people. That's how you get butts and seats, or cars at the drive-in. Maybe that might be a better way to put it.
Yep.
Did you get to go? Yeah, I know you said you lived, New York City quite a bit when you were younger. Were you able to get out to Long Island to get to a drive-in or anything like that?
Yeah, I was able to get out to Long Island and go to Jersey to go to drive-ins. So I
Yeah.
experienced the drive-ins. I love drive-ins, but again, until I got relatively older in my 40s, I preferred the activity of the city. Then we moved out to the Poconos, so we were like on mountains in the middle of forests with bears and bald eagles and turkeys and raccoons and lynxes, all sorts of things. So going outside, you were likely to encounter nature in one of its many forms, some of them not very safe to be around. I wound up treasuring my privacy and enjoying my privacy. And the times I've returned to the city for whatever reason, it's overwhelming because I would see more people in that day than I'd seen all year in Pennsylvania or northwestern New Jersey for that fact. Now that we live in Tenafly, I see a lot more people and I'm involved much more in my community. So it's not as bad a culture shock. But after being in the woods for a decade, seeing the streets of New York was mind-boggling.
I think I know what you mean. The living in the biggest city in North America requires a lot of energy, requires a lot of stamina, and as you age, you do want something maybe at a smaller pace, or well, at less of a pace, not a smaller pace. It sounded dumb. And
You
maybe that's
Go ahead.
pardon me. Well, and sometimes there's a lot to be said for slowing things down and enjoying things a little more. You lived in Pennsylvania, which is right now the #1 state with the most drive-in movie theaters.
I did not know that, but I knew that there were a lot of movie theaters because where we had our store, there were two drive-in movie theaters within a short distance from our store. And we sold, guess what? Collectibles and books and comics and all sorts of things. Um,
Well, I live about 5 miles or so from Pennsylvania, very close, and it's an interesting state. You've got Philly and Pittsburgh, and then in the middle, it's a little bit of everything. It's pretty, a lot of small towns, pretty rural. And I think that's one of the reasons why you do see a lot of drive-ins there, because you do have the Philadelphia metro area and Pittsburgh metro, but in the middle there's not a whole lot there, and I think that's one of the reasons why the drive-ins have survived. There was one, the closest drive-in to where I live right now is actually closed sadly, because the owners developed COVID and passed away.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think they had adult children, and their adult children initially said they were going to try to get the drive-in open, but it didn't open last year, and it doesn't sound good.
People in the parts of Pennsylvania that I lived, they talked about drive-ins all the time. And not near a store, but near where we actually lived. I think the drive-in had been closed for a while, and this was a topic that kept coming in endlessly. And I wish I had $1 for every person who showed me drive-in collectibles, like pictures from when the drive-in was active, and who regaled me with stories about when the drive-in was active, and people trying to form associations to resurrect the drive-in. So it was a very important thing to them, very important culturally.
Well, and yeah, it was part of your community, and if you did live, in a rural area, that was your source of entertainment. And I know what I'm talking about because when I was a kid, we lived we lived outside of a smaller town, but we're out, in a rural area, and we had like 3 or 4 different drive-ins to pick from. If you didn't like what was on at the one 2 miles from your home, just drive another mile, and then you have a different program in another one.
Yeah,
I can still remember seeing the Abominable Dr. Fives. My parents took me to see that at the drive-in, and I begged, and got to go. You loved the movie, and when the sequel came out, I begged and got to see it again. Got to see Bloodsuckers, which is actually it's got a great title, but the movie, it's not a bad movie or anything like that, but mm, it, it wasn't what I was looking for at that time. It just sounded, I wanted to see vampires or bats or something like that, and it's just it's more of a drama than anything else, really.
I remember during the heyday of my TV show, I used to have Lloyd Kaufman from Trauma
Yes.
every now and then. And I also had like Kabuki Man and the Toxic Avenger.
Mm.
And Lloyd, Lloyd was great. And at the Lake Placid Film Festival that I attended, I made a movie of us coming to Lake Placid to attend the film festival. It was a short movie, and Lloyd showed it on the screen during the trauma time. So we had this movie that we made, and of course Lloyd was part of the movie, and we started a campaign against John Sayles. I don't even remember what John Sayles had done to us, but he did something. And we gathered more news coverage than the film festival itself by making that little film and wandering around town. People took me on their boats. People gave me furs because I was, my show was called Flora the Barbarian. So I came there to conquer Lake Placid. So our story became that, the conquest of Lake Placid. That's what the short was called. And I think we made it into a movie. It had a limited theatrical release locally. And it showed on like fringe cable for quite a while. I was going to recut that and add stuff to it, but then it was destroyed in the flood I experienced. So that adventure is mostly lost, except there are some clips on YouTube, so it could still be found there. But one of the things I miss about the show was because I had a visual TV show, is I used to get movies from like indie film companies.
Mhm.
I'm not talking about 1 or 2 movies. I'm talking about boxes of DVDs.
I
And,
did too, once upon a time. Yes.
and I used to love watching them. And then every now and then we'd have like something, I get to interview some of the stars or the directors or the producers. And that was always lots of fun. And we had clips. And we'd show the clips, and I even though the show didn't focus on that exclusively, like the podcast don't focus on one thing exclusively, it was often enough that it was fun, and I had a lot of cool DVDs at the time as well.
I used to get a lot of VHS back in the day. Stuff that I would try to watch it, and if I couldn't do it, I couldn't do it. And I won't mention the name of the director, and I won't mention the title of the movie, but I saw one that was just the most god awful, sexist, dumb, but it had its charm, I suppose.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and when I say sexist, I don't mean. I guess it's like hell. There's varying degrees of it. This was just sort of sophomoric, humor, almost what you would expect in a teenage locker room at a high school, something like
Uh-huh.
that. Just god awful. And a couple of actors that I knew that who had been following for a long time were in it. I was, oh God, you poor thing. Why, why did you do this? It's so bad. But you know what? I kept it. So it's one of it. It's got to be one of the worst films I've ever seen. And God knows there's a long list of
Well,
those.
it deserves to be held. Then some films are just so beyond that they attain a level that
They sort of take on a life of their own.
yeah, they do.
And this is one of them. I don't know that there's a cult following for this film or what. I probably ought to look it up because I can remember. I can remember the title, and it's just like I said, just one of the worst things I've ever seen. But as I recall, I did watch that thing from beginning to end. I was appalled for like the first third of it. I was just sort of slack jawed, kind of. It was as if somebody had filmed a 13-year-old boy's fantasy.
And it probably was a 13-year-olds or once 13.
But add about 30 years to that. But yes, but say what you will about the person who did it. The film got made, it got distributed. So I don't know that anybody else ever saw it but me.
But it was seen.
I was an audience. Yes, I was the audience for the picture. Anyway,
I still love hanging out in like Trauma, because the Trauma building was in New York City. They had a building back then, a whole building, and it was in Hell's Kitchen, I believe, if I remember correctly. So I spent a lot of time hanging out there and getting to see how things happen behind the scenes. And I was in some of their footage from the Lake Placid Film Festival, and I was actually filmed for a couple of Trauma films. Unfortunately, I was cut out, and I wasn't even on the special edition that was issued. Some people were on the special edition hoping to catch me, but it was still
got left on the cutting room floor.
I got left on the cutting room floor.
Story of my life, most definitely.
For a while, I don't know, I probably shared this with you, but for a while when I was doing my thing, I was very visible. People used to put me in their movies, so I became like Where's Waldo, because you have like a crowd scene there. You'd have me in front other with like a huge sword on my back, as part of the crowd scene, looking solemn or whatever. And a movie unfortunately never got released because they did something with the money that wasn't legal. But I was filmed very extensively there, and I was kind of like this Obi-Wan Kenobi type figure that would appear to the characters every now and then and give them some wisdom. So I miss those days, and I know we talked about this before, but I definitely want to start making movies again, because that was one of the most fun things I ever did in my entire life, and I've done many fun things in my entire life. So I've been playing with that.
Well, interestingly, I was thinking about taking a trip up to Carmichael's, Pennsylvania, which is about 35 minutes or so from here, and checking out the drive-in. So you make your movie, I'll buy the drive-in, and we'll have a premiere there.
There you go. That'd be awesome. We'll premiere every movie there. Bring people out in buses.
Well, to tell you the truth, I had an idea for a business where it's still salvageable drive-in would be awesome. It would be just a ticket for it. So that might be something for me to explore here, coming up pretty soon as I begin transitioning away from be 35 years in higher education, into the next phase of my career.
And you have enough collectibles to open up a drive-in museum.
Yeah, I'm glad you said museum. At first, I thought you were going to suggest that I sell them. I, with me collecting, it only some people.
I'm a collector too. I understand. No, but a museum. Imagine with the glass cases, and you could move the exhibits, whatever you want at home, you could bring back home, and then whatever sitting around in a closet or a box or an attic or a basement, you could put that out and share it with the world and let people experience the wonder of it all.
Actually, I have done that several times. One of our university libraries has a large display space. It's the newest library on it. Well, that's not exactly true, but anyway, this one particular library on campus has a lot of display space, and I've had several collections there over the years. I did have an antique toy and vintage promotional model display there for, I think, about 5 months. Most recently, I had a display of movie memorabilia that was on display until last summer. And this was a mixture of lobby cards. There was a lot of display space, but it was in small portions, if that makes any sense.
That makes sense.
And I couldn't wedge anything really big in there, sadly. But some of my old movie equipment, I had several the Super 8mm projectors and vintage 1970s Super 8mm films. I had a pretty big collection. Well, I have. I haven't gotten rid of any of it, which is my big problem. Is I just absorb. I'm not to hoarding status yet. Fortunately, I'm also a decent carpenter, so I've built closets everywhere. I'm trying to think of how many of them that I have built into the house since we bought it. Quite a few of them now that I think about it. As much storage space as I could get. So it doesn't look like an episode of Hoarders, fortunately, but there is a lot of stuff. And you're right. You're right. It is nice to be able to have it on display, because why just have it and pack it away? It doesn't make sense. So nobody at the library has asked me for anything more yet, but I could always whip up another movie memorabilia or old toy display. Gosh, I mean, we have other collections beyond that too. Think about it. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should go make them an offer on that old drive-in. have more room for all my stuff.
You never know, and then we can do shows to promote your drive-in and have like exclusive meet the stars from whatever movies we happen to make, and
we could do weddings too.
Yeah, we could. I'm actually an ordained minister. I've married.
Oh, wow! Okay.
Married people over Skype. That was interesting.
Well, we could. I could also procure us some vintage cars that we could park, and we could do photo ops with them, and use those as part of the weddings. As sort of a limousine, if we can get them to run. That is.
There you go, an exciting adventure, and we could definitely do it.
That sounds like a blast too. Yeah. I'm sure I would go bankrupt in a couple of months, but I'd have a good time at it.
Not if we do a reality show based on the drive-in and the museum and stuff like that. And I do like guerrilla theater a lot, and I used to more so when I was younger and in New York. Like when I had my show, I used to go on quests in the middle of the night. So I would go into a store that was open at 3 a.m. and ask them questions about the quest item I was looking for to see. And we weren't filming this. I was just doing it, to have fun and to make the life of someone who's a cashier at 3 o'clock in the morning in an all-night deli a little bit more interesting. And some places used to wait for us to pop up there. Eventually, I acquired a small troupe of people, and we used to stage these really elaborate type of things. I remember we had one where I was the wise people from the mountains, and I was explaining to my troupe how soda machines work, and explaining to it. They were like rapt attention and looking and amazed that the soda came out, and things like that. So here when I had my show and we were covering the human services, we used to knight people who were doing something for the community.
Oh,
So I've been proposing that here locally, that the people, because I'm very involved with wellness.
do you have a queen who can do that?
Well, Athena comes with me sometimes, and
Oh, great. Okay,
we
awesome.
did the
That'll work.
holiday parade. We helped the mayor and the president of the Chamber of Commerce open up new stores, and welcome them to the community. So we're pretty active with that. And people like cite me because I don't walk around as much as I used to when I was younger. So people talk about having seen me here or there, but we're going to start knighting people who are either individuals or nonprofit organizations or other organizations who are doing something to improve the community's wellness. So we'll start filming that. So that'll start the whole reality show type of thing running, because we're putting it on YouTube initially. So maybe we could have like a crossover or something.
Sounds good.
Now, you also do a lot to help drive-in theaters continue to exist by drawing attention to them and drawing attention to places that help them continue to exist, and the archives that keep these movies from deteriorating into nothingness. You're very active with that, and that is an awesome thing.
I'll tell you what, this is going to sound more depressing than it should.
Okay.
But nowhere I ever shopped, places that I ate, or theaters that I went to as a child, none of that exists. None of it. Think about it for a minute. I'm sure you could probably say the same thing. I mean, none of it is still around anymore, and I really think that the world's a worse place for it, quite honestly.
I agree.
And during the early days of the pandemic, drive-ins became at least temporary saviors.
Yes.
And over the years, I've made it kind of a mission, no matter where we are in the country, if we are near a drive-in, I will seek it out. It may not go to the show or anything like that, but I will be there during the day, if not at night, to check it out. And some areas, like the state of Maryland, does not have a drive-in movie theater at all anymore. Isn't it a shame?
Yes, it is a shame.
Pennsylvania, I think, has like 20, a little more than 20 that's still around, and that is a lot, for a state. Some states, like I said, Maryland doesn't have any at all. And Maryland and Pennsylvania share a border, so
Yes.
you would think that in those areas, it's kind of the same part of the country, but there's not. And it's such a shame. I would just like to see some of them persevere, because it's still a viable venue, to watch a film. And how much fun is it that we're going to a drive-in on a nice, spring or summer day? You take lawn chairs, put the top down on the car, and just enjoy it.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I'm old now, and when the program doesn't start until after 9 o'clock, I've got my pajamas on. Now that really is like the old days of going to a drive-in for me, because when I was a kid, sometimes you did wear your
The
pajamas.
pajamas, yeah.
Yeah, because with the idea that you were going to fall asleep in the back seat, and then your parents would carry you in to the house after you got back from the movies. I usually tried as much as I could to stay awake, unless the movie was just not that interesting to a child. If it was some heavy drama or something. But if it was a horror film or something like that, yeah, I was going to stay awake through the program. And another thing that I loved about drive-ins as a kid is that some of them had little playgrounds close to the screen, and it was always fun. You tried to push your parents to get there early, but it was always fun to play on the teeter-totter or merry-go-round or the swings or something like that. And that's something that I have just not seen at any drive-in that still exists. I haven't seen any of those. I don't. It's probably an insurance, like a liability.
Liability.
I'm sure it is, because when we were kids, how many scars do you have where you gashed your hand on something you just bought? I've got a lot.
Yes.
and now that company would be sued into oblivion. Back then, it was just
You're a kid and you get hurt. Yeah. That's pretty much.
Well, and it made you develop respect for the item too. I mean,
Yes.
I had a swing set. I had a swing set that would give you tetanus so fast, and I respected it for that. It was like, whoa. There were certain ways you were supposed to use the swing set and certain things you weren't supposed to do. And if you did one of those, you were probably going to need to be rushed to a hospital.
Yeah, we lived in a totally different era. The world was a different place. I remember being a small
An
kid
era of personal responsibility.
and
Yes.
riding subways by
Very
myself,
different.
riding buses by myself as like a grade schooler. And now
Well,
you can
yeah.
dream of doing that, putting a kid by themselves on the subway platform. You'd be arrested for endangering your child.
Yeah. CPS would have a lot to say to you over that. But back when I was a kid, not only did most, and these parents weren't people that I would consider permissive. Do you know what I mean? But if you wanted to go downtown, on Saturday and, watch a 50-cent movie and then go to the comic store and the record store and all of that, and this was in downtown, fine, see you in 5 hours. Nobody thought anything of it.
No, but nobody thought anything of selling you cigarettes or selling beer or letting you go to a porno.
Oh yeah. Well,
when I was 11, I was doing all those things, and again, nobody thought anything of it. It was just okay.
I know, and people would be so appalled now, and it was like, wait a minute, that was my childhood. Don't be appalled by that. But like I said, it's not as though our parents, were neglecting us or anything.
No.
Actually, it was, in some ways, it was their way of teaching us, about the world,
Preparing you for the world. Yeah, that's
yeah,
what it was.
yeah, and you had to learn how to interact, in a variety of situations. And I guess they thought they had done a good enough job, in your formative years to get you to the point where you could distinguish right from wrong. And if there was trouble around, since that there was, they made you paranoid enough.
I had to start working at 11 so I could learn about the labor, like how jobs work and saving money and stuff like that. So 11 years old, I was in Harlem in a superette, and that was I was working in a superette, till.
What did you do, bag groceries?
Yeah, gross. Well, I'm Greek, and Greeks tended to gravitate toward the food industry. They had
Right.
restaurants, superettes, they had carts and things like that. So my father had worked in a superette at the time, so that's where I worked. And I wasn't only working with my father. I'd have to get up like 6 in the morning and take a train to 110th Street and get out and go, before they opened up the store. And and I was 11, and again, you wouldn't do that now.
Probably not. Like I said, CPS would be knocking on your door these days. But back then, it was responsible parenting. So it's so weird.
But
I wish
in our world.
Well, and I mean, like I said, it wasn't that our parents were overly permissive, because they weren't.
No, my parents were not. I'm Greek Orthodox by birth and by raising. I'm no longer Greek Orthodox, but that
Mhm.
was very strict education and cultural conditioning that I got.
But if you wanted to go into the city to do something, it was okay.
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, my experience was exactly the same. And yeah, I think you learned a lot, being out of your comfort zone, you without your parents around, and you had to make your own decisions, and decide what you wanted to do and decide what was safe. And some of those memories from childhood are some really fun. Some of my most favorite ones, really. Like
Maybe
on a random Saturday afternoon, we would go to the old Grindhouse movie theater with sticky floors, um, watch a couple of bad movies. There was a Planters Peanuts store. Find one of those now, right beside the theater, and you could go in, buy roasted peanuts and stuff like that, and then take them into the theater. They didn't mind. I have a feeling it's probably owned by the same person at the time. And there was a cool record shop on the other side of the theater. There was a comic book store down the street. Um, yeah, all of it's been knocked down. None of it is there anymore. I've driven through there a few times since, and it's all gone. Every bit of it. It's a shame too, because uh, uh, it's part of my childhood. It's just I feel like Chrissy Hind. My city was gone, but it
I,
is.
I
It
know what
is.
that feels like too. I tried to visit. It was over a couple of decades ago, but I tried to visit the neighborhood I grew up in the Bronx.
Mhm.
Somebody shot at me with
Really.
a gun. Yeah. Fortunately, it didn't hit me.
Well,
Uh,
yeah.
that was visiting my old neighborhood. Now it's gentrified. Now it's undergone
Oh.
gentrification, so it's a totally different neighborhood again, with people who can afford to live in New York City. But
Mm.
the neighborhood changed over the years several times. I'm sure it'll continue to change, but it taught me too. There's no going back. Sometimes things are gone. They're not going to come back. You can't revisit them and reminisce or wax nostalgic.
Well, just this would have been September. About 6 months ago. My mom and I were in Michigan, and she wanted to drive by our old house. And I said, I've driven by it once before, and I didn't really recognize it. So I told her, I said, fine, but don't manage your expectations, because you're not really going to recognize it. And we pulled up to it, and she was of the same opinion I was. It was like, what happened to the house?
Yeah.
It doesn't look the same at all. They changed the roof line, which is weird. They you can They changed the entrance to the house. It used to be in the front. It faced the street. Now it's on the side, and where the porch was on the front, they boxed it in, and I guess it's living space now. But there is no door there. There are no steps to a porch or anything. They've taken all that out. It's all gone. And now the entrance to the house is on the side where the driveway is. Then, like I said, the roof line's different. It had that Dutch colonial roof line when we lived in it, and now it's just a straight pitch. It just doesn't look anything like what it did. And the barn that was behind the house, long gone. Um, it just doesn't look the same at all.
I just looked at the time and we're out of time again. Uh,
Yes.
but thank you. I enjoyed this conversation a great deal. And I want to announce to everybody that Brian's Drive-In Theater is celebrating its 25th anniversary. And that is incredibly awesome. And we are going to do something special about that. It's still in the works, but we definitely have to celebrate that. And I've been a fan of the drive-in theater since the very beginning. I thought I came onto it late, but no, I came onto it in the very beginning. And
Yes,
I used to
you did.
Xerox. I used to print out the pages because I didn't know how long it would last. And here we are, still here, and we're
I
talking
used to
about
do
it.
that too.
You too?
Not with my own site, but with others. Yeah, because you would be a fan of something one day, and the next day it was just gone.
It wasn't there anymore.
See it again. And that I guess my stamina is my claim to fame, and being able to keep it going all these years, and I'm still in it every day working. It took me about a year to do this last update, and when I started doing the update, everything cleared the W3C validator, and now things are tripping it again. So I'm having to go back through every page and update the HTML to current code. It never ends, really.
It never ends, but it's looking phenomenally awesome, and it still has that powerful retro look that attracted me there all these years ago, and still brings me back. So you're doing an awesome job with it. I have something to announce, and I will announce it on your show for the first time publicly. Dr. Barbara Becker Holstein, who's a women's empowerment psychologist, she and I have been doing entertainment for like over a quarter of a century, as well, on and off. And we're doing it again. She has a show on the channel, and our show went from Blog Talk Radio to Zoom now. And now we're going to experiment with it. We're going to have it professionally edited. And put on more places than we usually put it, because we usually put the show, like I usually put the show on YouTube.
Yeah.
And this is going to go to a bunch of different places. So we're going to see how that goes. And if that goes, that's going to be a step available to anybody who wants it. Some people prefer the radio show, but a few people have been moving over to Zoom. So we've been doing Zoom shows. If this is something that is affordable and people like it, then that option will be available. And
oh, great.
So I will, of course, offer it to you. But I'm
I
excited.
would love to.
And how can people find Brian's Drive-In Theater and communicate with Brian?
Well, all you have to do is to go to briansdriveintheater.com, and you can see the newly revamped site with hundreds more photos, extensively rewritten biographies in many cases, all brand new HTML. As well, and lots of different films, television episodes, newsreels, and trailers that you will find throughout the drive-in that you can watch. And if you want to interact with me on social media, I am very active on Facebook. I'm in it every day. I do have a Twitter account, but I only lurk on Twitter. I do not post regularly anymore, and that's how you can interact.
Thank you so very much, Brian. I enjoyed this conversation. As I enjoy every conversation. Say hi to Greg. I didn't hear Greg commenting in the background today.
Yeah, he's on a different floor.
Oh, okay. Give him my regards, and thanks to all our listeners. This should be on YouTube in a day or two. Until next time, this is us wishing you joyous journeys and amazing adventures. Good night, everybody.
Good evening.